You think darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was already a man. By then it was nothing to me but blinding.
This is the Boer Republic podcast.
Welcome to another Boer Republic podcast. Today we've got a very special guest, Conscious Caracal. Conscious Caracal has made a name for himself dealing with the topics that are often unsaid in South Africa. And what's become interesting is, from a cultural perspective, he's put Afrikaans on the map, especially when dealing with an international audience. So thank you for joining us tonight, Conscious Caracal. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for inviting me on. I had an incredible discussion with you when you came on my show a few weeks ago, so I'm more than happy to come on your show so you can grill me a bit instead of me just asking all the questions. I'm completely ready for whatever you can throw at me.
Okay, no, great. We appreciate you coming on the show and taking the time to join us. Just to start off, please tell us more about your work so far, why you do what you do, and what motivates you.
All right, so I started out in, I think it was 2016, after one of the big terrorist attacks. I think it was the Orlando terrorist attack, where I just saw all this. I was online, I didn't have a channel or anything, and I was just reading all this propaganda everywhere from people saying, but what about the Crusades? And oh no, but the IRA are much worse. And I'm like, okay, wait. There are too many people that I'm seeing. This is not a fringe opinion. The majority of people have absolutely no idea about just the topic of terrorism and the idea of religious terrorism. So I went and did my research on the IRA and all these Christian terrorist groups, and then I made a video called Islamic versus Christian Terrorism. And I went through all the Christian terrorist groups that were named by a bunch of people, and gave the people the stats and just showed how there is no comparison. I mean, when's the last time you heard about an IRA bombing or someone being attacked? But anyway, that's beside the point. But then I made that video and it got such a positive response that I realized, well, okay, here seems to be a gap in the market. Here seems to be something that I can do that I enjoy doing. And at the same time, people see value in it. So then what I did was I started looking for more topics and I started making more videos on things that I found an interest in, but also topics that I didn't see anyone else really talking about, or talking about from the angle that I could talk about the topic itself. But now in 2018, I was contacted by Nick Monroe, an American journalist, and he said he wanted to connect South African YouTubers and South African social media influencers to the West. And I said, yeah, sure, come on my channel and we can have a chat. And that was the first episode of Stream of Consciousness, my show, where I just give a platform to anyone that's willing. And I give them questions and they give you, the audience, a lowdown on who they are and why people should care. And it's not a debate or like a setting where I try to prove their views wrong or try to humiliate them on air. I just want them to calmly, like over a beer almost, just give their opinion on certain issues. I want to just pick their brain in terms of what they think about current issues and where the world's going and how they think it should be fixed. And then I leave it up to the audience to decide. I'm not going to end the show with, so I prove them wrong, and this is I'm waiting for my next debate opponent. It's more of just it's actually a genuine safe space where people can just give their views, and I'm not going to just grill them and try to humiliate them. It's more of like like I said, the real idea of a safe marketplace of ideas where ideas can be exchanged, and it's not a hostile environment. But alas, at the same time, I've been struggling to get some radical leftists or even some leftists on, even though I have talked to a leftist anarchist, and you've had him on your show as well, Claude, which was also a very interesting episode that did very well. And now, currently, I'm sitting on 7 episodes of Stream of Consciousness so far. Each episode seems to be outdoing the previous one with at least 100 views. So there's a steady increase in interest and in my sub count. So I'm doing something right, and people seem to be tuning in every time. So at the moment, that's my mission. Is I'm not making money out of it. It's just my hobby at the moment, and I just want to give a platform so we can actually have some exchange of ideas. Because sunlight is the best disinfectant. And if you just leave people to discuss their more radical ideas in the shadows or in little dark corners, then we're never going to have a dialogue or really know what's out there. We're not going to know the real cultural zeitgeist. We're just going to have a fake image. So that's what I try to do with my channel. And then on my Twitter account, it's more just me giving my thoughts and opinions on politics and philosophy. And it's literally a stream of consciousness where I just post whatever I think about something and see what the reaction is. So at the same time, I'm not affiliated with any political party. I don't even know who I'm going to vote for in 2019. So I'm not in a certain type of position where I'm either funded by someone or have an allegiance to a party which influence my views. It's just raw Caracal, basically, when I'm giving my opinions. So I hope I can establish that brand, the idea that people can trust when I give my opinion on a topic. It's completely my own view. It's not that I'm being pulled or my strings are being pulled by some higher overlord. But on the topic of South Africans and Afrikaners in general, and as you mentioned, bringing Afrikaans more into the global world, the thing that motivates me is that classic scenario where you go camping and you arrive. And then you ask, like, okay, where's the 10 pins? And then everyone's, oh, but I thought you were going to bring it. And then someone else, I thought you were going to bring it. And that's exactly how I see the current discourse at the moment, is we're frogs in a pot and the water's getting hotter. And everyone else is just depending on their friends or someone else bigger than them or more famous than them to actually say what needs to be said. And I think it relates back to this George Orwell quote that goes, sometimes the first duty of intelligent men is the restatement of the obvious. And I think that's what my channel and your channel as well is doing in terms of how I understand your mission as well. It's just that restatement of the obvious, just bringing some common sense back into the political discourse.
That's the main sort of thing for us as well, and especially mentioning George Orwell. Free speech has become a rarity nowadays, and that's given rise to alternative platforms. It's given rise to dissident voices. It's given rise to new avenues in which people can obtain information, and to precisely do what you try and achieve is to help them formulate their own opinion, give them everything they need, and they can progress and they can develop on their own. And that's one of the reasons that we do what we do is purely because we want to provide that practical aspect, that passing on of knowledge, or just presenting people's opinions so that people can basically make up their own minds as to where they feel they want their future to go.
There definitely is a lot of overlap with your views with ours, and that's and we can see with your subscribers, they obviously are attracted to your way of presenting the honest truth, because it is growing, and congratulations about that. I just feel it's a very sad day for our show, because we were hoping no one is ever going to use the word safe space, but now that it's happened, I don't know if we're going to have to change our approach a little bit. But and like, you say that it does kind of become sort of, the same ideas pushed, because it is very difficult to get people from the left. I don't know, how are you going to get an Antifa person on to talk for more than 5 minutes, because it's obviously so difficult not to trigger them. Mm. But we're obviously hoping for the same thing, but we've come up empty so far.
Yeah, that's why I end my show with the idea of, don't just believe what I say, research what I say. Don't just, and you should apply that rule to anyone, even your most respected heroes or people that you respect in the political sphere. don't just always become complacent and uncritical and just accept everything they say. You need to keep a sharp mind. You need to always keep researching, always stay critical, always make sure and test yourself and your heroes. And I think that idea of self-criticism, when you get to a point where you take all your core beliefs and you can't find a reason to doubt them, you can't find a logical argument to disprove your core beliefs, then you're in a pretty nice situation. That means you've done your research. That means, or you're either being willfully ignorant towards the opposite arguments against them. But if you can go into a debate and stand your ground and be able to defend all your core principles and without any shred of doubt even entering your mind, then you are in a pretty good space. And that's what you need to aim for, is that you always need to question yourself. You need to always question your core beliefs and make sure that what you believe actually is rational and makes sense with how the world is ordered. But at the same time, you should never get caught up in an echo chamber. You should always try and surround yourself with some people that disagree with you, because an echo chamber it dulls the mind. You get to a point where it's just a circle jerk, basically, where everyone's just patting each other on the back and saying, oh, isn't it great that we know how the world works?
I was just thinking that, especially maybe to our audience, you can just give a bit of an idea about why you stay anonymous. And obviously we do as well. We've got our reasons. And, I just think also for international viewers, there's probably that idea of we want to create this space for open and free ideas, but still we stay anonymous. And I think some people can sometimes see that as hypocritical. And, along with that answer, maybe you can kind of explain how the alternative media space in South Africa is different from, say, overseas countries like America, and maybe how that plays into the reason why you stay anonymous.
Right. I think I'll take it one question at a time. To answer the first question, that's a question that I've been asked multiple times, and many people similar to me also grapple with that idea. Now, this is a pretty relevant question, because yesterday Ronaldo Roets attacked anyone that are posting. He attacked anyone that is posting under a fake or anonymous pseudonym or name, and I took him on about it. I said, "Well, we live in a time where a conservative Jew like Ben Shapiro gets called a Nazi and a white supremacist. We live in a time where it's much easier, where a corporate entity or a corporation would much rather just fire an employee for wrongthink than have to deal with the PR nightmare of it being reported in the media that they're employing a literal Nazi." Now, I've been called a Nazi and a white supremacist and a far-right propagandist and everything under the sun. And just from personal experience, it just reinforces my view that it is better at the moment for me to stay anonymous. And there's a good example. I also posted this in reply to Ronaldo. Just look at the Ashwin Willemse case, where even though an investigation found no racism in that encounter or that situation, people were still calling for Naas Botha and Nick Mallet to be fired. Now, these are high-profile individuals. Now, what will happen to a nobody like me that only has 800 subscribers? I'd have no public sympathy. I just have to take it. And at the same time, I also just want people to judge my ideas on their merit and not on who I am. I think it was another social media shitposter, almost Klipkop. He took Ronaldo Roets on and he said, well, yesterday you attacked Steve Hofmeyer and Jay Du Plessis about they're just capitalizing on farm murders to sell CDs. And he said, well, if they didn't use their real names and they were posting anonymously, you wouldn't be able to make that personal attack. And now you're telling people to just use their real names. So I think that was a absolutely knockout blow. Like I started laughing when I read it because it was so it was perfect. It was on the nose. It was a fucking punch in it. It was a knockout punch.
Yeah, and I played into that trap, yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I always tell people is if I could draw better, I would draw like a political cartoon where there's like a guy talking to someone else and he's attacking the personally attacking the other person ad hominems. And then the other person's like, hey, my ideas are up here. And yeah, so if I was a political cartoonist, I'd do that. And I saw the political cartoonist Germ. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's one of the few political cartoonists left with some balls. He's followed me, so maybe I should send him that idea. He can do it. He can take credit for the idea even.
Yeah, I see. He's recently come back onto Twitter after a very long hiatus. And
he says he's looking for material.
Yeah, well, we should all post as many. We should bombard him with as many ideas as possible. Speaking of sort of the situation in South Africa in regards to farm murders and that, recently the Canadian, I'm not sure if he is a she or she is a he at the moment, and that's a very long drawn out story, but the gist of it is Lauren Southern has made a name for herself challenging a lot of left-leaning ideas, even going so far as to change her gender legally in the Canadian Home Office or something like that. And recently she's been in South Africa documenting what's going on here with the farm murders and so on. And just this week she released her documentary Farmlands. We've both watched it. And it's quite a powerful documentary regarding what goes on in South Africa. Perhaps, have you seen it and do you have any thoughts on it?
Yes, I watched the documentary and I thought it had some weaknesses and some strengths. And I thought at least its biggest strength is the fact that it's a step in the right direction. She's doing something that not many people or anyone for that matter are doing at the moment. And I just appreciate that immensely as a South African, as someone that knows people that have been victims of farm attacks and farm murders. This is something so needed. And just looking at the leftist vitriol and acidic attacks on the documentary and Lauren Southern in the wake of this, it infuriates me to an extent where I know people that have been victims of farm attacks. I know people that have been victims of farm murders. A girl that went to school with me's father was killed while defending his family on their farm. And when I see what people post about the issue of farm murders and just disregarding it as something not important and saying it's all propaganda and it's white supremacist and it's all made up, it breaks my heart. It makes me feel that even though it's maybe not an honest judgment, it makes me genuinely consider that these people are evil, that these people have malicious intent, that they are not good people. And it really frustrates me, the fact that looking at the reaction that we get to a genuine issue that needs to be addressed.
The other thing that also stands out about the attack regarding her attempt at raising awareness of what's going on in the country, I think, if you look at the propaganda angle itself, people say, oh, but you inflating the issue or conflating the issue, and there's all sorts of other reasons as to why the documentary is supposedly rubbish. I don't think there's anyone in the country that hasn't been affected by the high crime rates in South Africa in some capacity. Personally, I've had a family member, not on a farm, but in their home. They've been murdered as a result of a break-in gone bad. So everyone has that experience to some extent in South Africa. It's such a far-reaching phenomenon that internationally you don't really grasp what goes on here unless you live in the country. And one thing about the Farmlands documentary was that Lauren Southern was able to carry across that feeling of the suffering that people go through, even the sort of paranoia. Jonas Nielsen, who did the Boer Project documentary, has stated in many of his interviews how we basically live in our own prisons in this country, and that can't be overstated enough.
Yeah. I tweeted out an image a few weeks ago of the rape gate that we have in our house, the idea of where the living quarters are separated from the rest of the house by a gate that you lock every night. And that tweet went viral. I think even Katie Hopkins retweeted it. And people were astonished by just the mere fact that these things exist. And this is a reality that a lot of us South Africans just find mundane. It's not even something shocking. And I think that we've just been so incredibly desensitized to the prisons that we live in and the situation that we live in that I don't think there's anything, and we talked about this when you were on my show as well, the fact that I don't think there's a lot left that can shock us.
Yeah, the nice thing about what Farmlands also did is it kind of showed to the international public, especially when she interviewed, there was an ANC councillor member and one of the MPs from Black Lands First, which is I dare say, political party more far right than EFF. And, I think most people would never really understand how, as you would say, evil and malicious and attacking our politicians really are, that they are very blatant about their ideas of taking over land from white people, and what we have to deal with on a political scale, where if in any other country you would imagine if MPs or politicians came out and said those words that they said on the documentary, there would be complete outroar and probable chaos in that case. So I think that was for me a very good point, where you could show the world kind of with what rhetoric we have to deal with every day, and because we're so used to it, in a sense that it doesn't really scare us in any way, because we're so used to our politicians saying these things and singing obviously songs like "Kill the Boer," where we hear it. But the bottom line is, I think this is where the desensitization happens. Is, there's a point where you can, if you're in your house and you hear it sounds like something is outside, you go out, you look, there comes a point where you stop even looking, because, it's as if you get triggered continually. And the same with like any stress response in your body. You can only react so much, and then you kind of stop reacting. Otherwise, you'll just burn out. And I think there is probably some kind of biological change in us, in that we just don't react anymore, because, well, it's the only way you can kind of stay healthy and you can stay sane, is the fact that you've basically just accepted. So I think some people even accept that is their fate, and they kind of accept that, at someday someone is going to, 3 or 4 guys with large guns is going to come through the door, and what can you do to stop it? You can't really do anything.
That thought hit a chord with me, because that's exactly what went through my mind when I was mugged a few years ago. I was standing there, and this guy's searching through my pockets with a knife over my heart, and my only thought was, okay, this is happening. It was bound to happen sometime. I wasn't even panicking. I was just calm and thinking, okay, this was just me striking out with the Russian roulette, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a very good term to use, Russian roulette. And the same, I've been mugged 6 times, and I've been in gunpoint 3 times. And, I don't go sleep in the bush every day. And it is an inevitability. And I think that's what people don't understand, and that's the kind of hardy aspect that, us Afrikaners have developed, in a sense. And probably, which obviously we'll get into later, is I think one of the big causes as to why there has been no backlash, that we haven't stood up together and we haven't fought back to any large degree, is because of this continual sort of stress, should I say trigger fatigue, if I can call it that.
Yeah, there's not there's not really, and you asked me this question when you were on my show, what will it take for the Afrikaners to really say this is enough? And my admittedly pessimistic answer was, I don't think there's one single event that would shock enough Afrikaners that they'd say, okay, this is enough now. We're not going, this is one killing too far. We've witnessed the complete end of the spectrum in terms of violence and brutality and just cruelty, that it can't be undone. The bar has been set so high that I don't think there's any type of cruelty or brutality that would really outdo what we've already been exposed to.
Yeah, and I think a nice segue into sort of a topic of immigration that's happening amongst the Afrikaners, and especially those with higher education. And I mean, this is sort of a question to you, and as you said previously now, is that you basically feel you want to stay, and you've started this to fight back. And what do you think would it firstly take you to emigrate to a safer place, in a country where you can use your skills in a better way? And what do you feel in general about the problem of immigration and what it means, especially obviously high skilled and white immigration out of the country? What do you feel, what does that hold for our country as a whole?
Yeah, I'm torn on the topic, because on the one side, we need these smart, educated individuals to really keep the country going, and in terms of being able to use their expertise in the business sector and the private sector. But at the same time, a part of me also doesn't want them here. If they want to run away and go live in another country for their own, and no disrespect to anyone that immigrates, but at the end of the day, it is still a selfish decision. You're still thinking about you and your family. and I completely understand it. I have no ill feelings towards them. But at the same time, those people that jump ship, they weren't prepared. They're showing that they weren't prepared to fight anyway. So there won't be any use when the shit really hits the fan. So that's the more morbid side, and there's these two contesting views in my mind playing out that yes, we need these people, but at the same time, what use would they be if their heart's already sold to another country?
That's also an interesting point to make, is regarding immigration and getting out of the country. I've been lucky to be able to speak to a few expats since we've started this project, and one of the sort of overwhelming experiences, or one of the overwhelming opinions, is that, you know, it's either people who left because of apartheid, or it's people who left because of the severe crime post-apartheid. And there's usually this unanimous opinion that, you know, now that things are so severe, what can we do to help? And I think this is where, and fine, they aren't here, but at least in my experience, what's interesting is to be able to hear them say, but okay, perhaps we can help with this, or you know, what can we do to spread the message? And that's then a useful vector for getting info out to foreign countries regarding South Africa. And I think in some ways it serves a purpose, even though most people in South Africa aren't able to get out. Even if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to get out. That's maybe also why we do this, is to be able to provide that sort of that light in the darkness. Because I think hope is something that people don't have much of these days. Just to bring Afrikaans back home, on your channel you've got a video that when I discovered your channel, it was one of the things that stood out to me, and it's called Ek Afrikaner. In English it's I Afrikaner. Perhaps you could tell us what motivated you to do that video specifically, and what does Afrikaans culture mean to you?
Well, what motivated me to make that video was the fact that I stumbled upon this poem by I think it's Yeye Silia, or I'm talking under correction, but yeah, it's a poem about what it means to be an Afrikaner, and it's an incredibly sad, but at the same time such a relatable poem. Where the first time I found the poem it was superimposed, or the text was over an image, and the image was of a Boer standing under an African tree at a small grave built out of little rocks, and he's holding his hat, and behind him his farm is burning. And that was such a powerful image to me, and alongside what's in the poem as well. And you can go to my channel if you want to check it out. I don't know it by heart, but that relates back to the idea of what it means to be an Afrikaner. That is, we live on the continent of Africa. We are a white tribe here on the dark continent, and at times it's very taxing. It's very hard. It's going to be blood, sweat, and tears, but it's worth it, because if you are truly an Afrikaner, then you know why it's worth it. Because this is where your ancestors separated themselves from Europe. This is where people came for hundreds of years, because they didn't want to be part of what was going on in Europe. They wanted to separate themselves. And you just look at the history of Afrikaans and Afrikanerdom. There's a very distinct effort, and you can see it in every generation, to separate ourselves from Europe. Firstly, we refer to ourselves as Afrikaners. We don't refer to ourselves as British or Dutch or German, unlike many English South Africans that kind of still, and this is just a personal anecdote, that still refer to themselves as English or British. We are Afrikaners. We have Africa in our name. Secondly, we speak a language, Afrikaans, which has the word Africa in it. It is a distinct language. When Afrikaans became an official language, that's when we separated ourselves from just being these Dutchmen at the southern tip of Africa. We became our own, almost like, tribe. And the interesting thing about the question is, what is an Afrikaner, is the fact that it's not a single thing. It is a synthesis of culture, language, and mentality. It's not something you just can describe to someone, but you as an Afrikaner, if you meet someone that is a Boer, an Afrikaner, you can instantly almost pick it up. It's just something in the way they carry themselves, the way they talk, and it's not. And the obvious is obviously they're talking Afrikaans to you, but you can just feel it. And it's just from my own personal experiences. I can see someone walking down the street, and I can tell you now, before even talking to them, this is an Afrikaans person, or this is an Afrikaans girl or an Afrikaans guy. I don't even have to talk to them. And I can't explain what it is. It's just this feeling I get when I meet new people. And from my own personal experience, what taught me what an Afrikaner is comes from the fact of how I was raised. Now, I was raised in a small town community in the countryside, in a farming community in the Boerland, the Swartland. And the town had 15,000 people. And the only real thing the connection I had with the Afrikaner culture was the stories that my father told me. He read me Boer War stories and Voortrekker stories, and he told me the history from a very young age. And that's where I didn't get that from school. You're not going to learn your history from there. You have to have some type of figure in your life, whether that be a parent or a friend or a brother or a sister, whatever, to just give you the true history of who you are and where you came from. And I had this conversation a year ago or 2 years ago with my brother, and he's went through the public school system. He had no connection to Afrikaans culture, and he didn't feel proud to be an Afrikaner. And I took him aside and said, okay, we're going to have a talk now because this is something important. And I just told him what I know about what it means to be an Afrikaner, where we came from, and why you should never feel ashamed of who you are, where you came from. You have greatness in your veins, and you were preceded by great men and women. And the thing is, back to the question of what it means to be an Afrikaner, and I can say it best in Afrikaans, is dit is nie net 'n kultuur of 'n taal nie, dit is die hele kombinasie van taal, kultuur, agtergrond, die hele feit dat ons is hierdie wit tribe hier onder op die suidelike punt van Afrika, en dit is nie net die konservatiewe Christelike Afrikaners van die noorde of die liberale Afrikaners van Kaapstad, of daar's nie 'n sekere denomination wat sê maar hierdie is die ware Afrikaners nie. Dis 'n kombinasie van mense wat luister na Steve Hofmeyer en mense wat luister na Fok of Polisiekar. Dis mense wat Zef is, dis mense wat suurknol regte soos staunch konservatiewe mense is. Dis 'n hele synthesis van al daai mense, en dit is, om terug te kom by daai gedig op my channel, 'n deel daarvan wat ek wel uit my kop uit ken is, dis 'n balling gekom oor die oseaan, dis 'n graf in die gras, dis 'n vallende traan, dis al, en dis al wat dit is om 'n Afrikaner te wees.
Perfect, thank you. That's a very succinct and perfect way to elaborate on the Afrikaner culture. What gets my goat up a lot of the time is where on TV, especially in the media, on the primarily Afrikaans channel Kyknet, you find that Afrikaans culture is essentially just having a braai. Americans would know it as a barbecue. Essentially just making meat on a fire and listening to socky music. And that's not what Afrikaans is about, although it's a very enjoyable pastime. There's a lot more to Afrikaans than just burning meat and having a good time on a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday afternoon. And speaking of the use of Afrikaans, I've seen from personal experience, that Afrikaans, and it's been in the news quite a lot in over the past 3 to 4 years, that Afrikaans has become persecuted in tertiary institutions. I'm not sure what your experience is with that, but I know there are a few instances like in the Free State, which was a primarily founded Afrikaans province. That specific university, the University of the Free State, was an Afrikaans university. And slowly but surely, Afrikaans has been faded out as a medium of instruction. And there was this interesting case where the library there eventually chucked out basically 100 years worth of what would be called Afrikaner. And it's books that were donated by very famous Afrikaans writers, and it was essentially chucked out by the rector there, and it ended up going to be sent to be pulped. And that might be an extreme example, but it's by no means an isolated one. Perhaps you could tell us about your experience, or if you have any experience, in regards to the way Afrikaans has been treated, perhaps in the media or in tertiary institutions?
For me, it's more of, and this might go into a bit more of a conspiracy theory territory.
Please, we love them.
If you want to, if you want to kill a culture, then you make its language useless. If you turn Afrikaans back into a kitchen language and it's not spoken in institutions or in business or in public, then what is keeping Afrikaners together? Let's say an Afrikaner sends his children to an English school and they become fully English. They can't even speak Afrikaans. And they immigrate to France, or let's just say they immigrate to another country. Do they stop being Afrikaners? Because they don't speak Afrikaans anymore. They can't communicate with their fellow Afrikaners back in South Africa that can't even speak English. And they switch over their loyalty to another country. And that's how I would, if I wanted to wipe a culture from the face of the earth, I would make their language absolutely redundant and make it useless. And because Afrikaans, in terms of the Afrikaner people, we are, and this might be maybe a controversial way of phrasing it, but we are blood, soil, and language. I think our language plays such an important role in our culture that a lot of people underestimate it. I had a mate that I was talking to who told me that the way for the Afrikaner to survive in the modern world is to abandon his language. And I told him that would be the Afrikaner selling his soul. If the Afrikaner abandons his language, then he has basically lost such a big part of who he is that he will not survive in the long run. Without your language, your culture is doomed. Why do you think, and even though it's not the sole factor, but something that's binding all Germans together or all French together, is the fact that in France, you speak French. In Germany, you speak German. That is such a binding factor. It's such a lowest common denominator almost, where you can find it anywhere you go in those countries, that you can't disregard the importance of a language. And if you take that away from the Afrikaner, he's not going to have any soul left, and his culture will slowly die. I know this is a very a morbid answer, but it needs to be stated, the importance of preserving our language, because if we don't, that means the end of the modern Afrikaner in the long run, in my view.
That's the reality. To be honest, I couldn't have said it better. The reality of the situation is that either our farmers are being killed, we are slowly losing demographics in this country, and a strong foothold that we have as a culture is language. And I mean, you said it yourself, Afrikaners are blood, soil, and language. So there is an intricate, and perhaps you can also just elaborate a bit more on this, is that it means then the Afrikaner is tied to the land. You know, if Afrikaans is tied to the country and the land by default, that means the Afrikaner is then tied to the land. So where does that leave the Afrikaner, especially in terms of the land issue that we're currently facing? And what choices and options does the Afrikaner have, especially if this means he's backed into a corner?
Now let's go back to my conspiracy theory, and it's getting more solid by the sentence. If Afrikaners are blood, soil, and language, if you take away the language and you take away the soil, then it's the only thing binding those Afrikaners together are their mutual heritage, their blood. That's not enough. The one part of the Holy Trinity is not enough to keep the synthesis alive. And in my conspiracy theory, if you want to wipe a culture away, you take away their most cherished part of their life, which is work, and you take away their means of communication, you make it redundant. Then that culture is going to be a very pathetic mirror or version of its former self, and it won't be able to survive. So at the moment, just looking at what's happening in our country, I can't help but see a concerted effort to try and weaken the Afrikaner culture and try to make it disappear.
Yeah, and that is kind of the perfect trifecta. And that's why I think we agree in a way with you that why immigration is so dangerous, because if you immigrate, and even if you're only going to speak Afrikaans maybe in your household, but you will definitely have to teach your children the culture within which you're trying to integrate with. And for me, that is the death knell to the culture, because you could see in 1 or 2 generations, Afrikaans will disappear. And the whole culture will disappear, because if you just have a couple of families all over the world, traditions will disappear. And, that's the beauty of the language, is that there's so many words that don't really have an equivalent meaning in English. It's words that, English people and, Africans even use Afrikaans words, because there's just no better way to describe it. And it's the same way you can't really teach someone our culture if you don't immerse them.
If you want to... If you want to tell someone to voetsek, that's pretty much unanimous. Everyone knows what it means. And to get back to that point you made about people immigrating and having to teach their children their culture and speak Afrikaans in their home, I'll tell you now, those children of theirs, the second generation, are not going to marry other Afrikaners. They're going to marry English people. Sure. And then they're probably going to speak English. Then it's gone. Yeah. Then it's one generation. It's not going to be sustained. So even though that's a very morbid way of looking at it, it's a reality we're going to have to discuss.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to kind of look at yourself as some kind of extinct animal. Should be on some protection list, and there should be a lot of races across the world collecting money for us. But yeah, that's a sad thing.
We can relate to the rhinos, the white rhino.
Yeah. Sort of just to add to the Afrikaans outside of South Africa question, have any of you seen, it's a documentary called Boers at the End of the World?
No, I haven't.
Now,
if you can tell me where to find it, I'd be very interested to view this. I didn't know it existed.
What I'll do is I'll include a link in the description below. But the documentary itself, Boers at the End of the World, or Boere op die Aardsdrempel. It's a very quick, easy Google search or YouTube search, and you find it. It's a documentary that a guy in South Africa did. I think it's Richard Finn Gregory, and it's a very interesting look at Boers that left South Africa sort of towards the end of the Second Anglo-Boer War, and they essentially established a community in Patagonia, of all places. So it's so far away from South Africa, but very much similar in terms of the environment that you'd find in the Kalahari or the Karoo. They stay in an area isolated, very rural. In the documentary itself, you can see they live a very isolated and rural life, very much like what you'd find in the more sparsely populated areas of South Africa. And it's quite interesting. In the trailer, in Patagonia, they speak Afrikaans. I mean, I can understand what they're saying, maybe with a bit of a dialect change here and there, but it's still Afrikaans. And what's interesting is what these guys say is when they ask, where do you come from? These are generations after the initial people that moved to Patagonia. And the key thing they say is, ek is 'n Afrikaner. Ek kom van Suid-Afrika. Suid-Afrika is my huis. South Africa is my home. That's where I come from. And for them, Afrikaans means to be tied to South African. Maybe just to add to that previous conversation is there's this isolated group of Afrikaners. Their offspring speak a dialect of Spanish, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite weird to see that. And I suppose maybe it's sort of like the Germans that moved to South America towards the end of the Second World War. I mean, they speak German too, but I'm sure they also speak Spanish. And it's very interesting to see how these people, they play accordion and think very much Afrikaner culture, very influenced by Afrikaner culture. But it's interesting to see that Afrikaans is there, although they're essentially dying out.
Do they play Yukske?
I don't know. I couldn't see it in the trailer, but they seem to be quite a jolly bunch, and very much in line with Afrikaans hospitality.
When was this made?
In 2015, roughly. 2014. That was released 2015.
Okay. So this community is still in existence.
Yeah,
That's very interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, they said that the youngest generation speaks Spanish. So it just goes to show that if you don't keep those traditions, then you lose them. If you don't use it, you lose it.
When we establish the Boer Republic, we bring these people home.
We'll have to, and you can see they want to come back, because I mean that's all they have is what they have there.
Yeah, and add a bit of Spanish dancing into our soccer techniques. I don't think that's a disaster.
Yeah. A bit of flair.
Socky dancing style is not really something about. Like it does the job, but at the same time, it's not very pleasing to the eye for someone that doesn't know what's going on.
Well, sure. It truly is, but I mean, you would take still the best AI to be able to write a program about how are people not bumping to each other the whole time. I think you could have it's like that guy from Beautiful Mind. He will have to sit down. Right. Incredible mathematics trying to describe that.
It's acute spatial awareness. I'll give us that.
Yeah, sure.
We've touched on the topic of Afrikaans as a culture and language being phased out, yet tinfoil hat wise. There's a reality to it though. But one of the other ways in which you affect the populace, Lauren Southern's documentary, there was this discussion of white squatter camps and so on. And one of the reasons that they gave was that labor laws are negatively affecting whites in this country. Not sure what your personal experience is regarding that, but perhaps you might have some understanding or some insight as to some of the labor laws that we have in the country. And do they indeed affect whites in a negative way?
Well, I don't have as much experience in terms of being affected myself, but at the same time, more from a just in general perspective, from my political or from my value system and my principles, I just want to see a labor market where the best guy gets the job, where it's a meritocracy, because that's the best way to move forward. That's why the private sector absolutely browbeats the public sector, because they actually have something resembling a meritocracy. And I think forcing a very rigid racial quota system on the private sector makes it resemble the public sector more and more by the day, which I think makes it more inefficient. And at the same time, then, what's the point then? What's the point of saying that we have a very robust private sector when the private sector plays by the same rules and by the same productivity standards as the public sector? I mean, then there's not really a distinction. So what I see from these racialized labor laws is the fact that it's hindering the private sector from just being a pure meritocracy, and it's appointing people based on the color of their skin, which I can't get behind. Even though I do understand the sentiment behind it and the mission that they're trying to accomplish, but I think the best way to accomplish the mission of representation in the private sector is to leave it up to the market and to just make it a meritocracy where the best man gets the job, and if he doesn't get the job, then it's because he wasn't the best suited for it, and then you can't really complain.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously an argument you've also had a lot, and it is an argument that is had like umpteen times every day in this country, and it's this idea that affirmative action laws are needed to compensate for the same discriminatory laws that we had under apartheid. And I find it one obviously very frustrating and very difficult, because similar to you, we also believe in that meritocracy should come out on top, and it's the best way to provide the most efficient work possible. How do you, if you get into this argument, I mean, other than obviously your meritocracy argument, but I just find that just it's not sufficient enough. What other ways do you argue against this notion that, affirmative action laws are, in a sense, moral and needed, even though we don't know how long it's going to keep going, to kind of compensate for the injustices of the past? How do you approach that, especially, if you might be arguing
I would say that you are looking at the wrong dimension in terms of a very real problem. I think you're putting the cart before the horse. You're trying to get equal outcome in terms of the end product rather than looking at where the root of the problem actually lies. So I can use just off the top of my head, I can use a metaphor for this. So let's say you're in your garden, there are two trees. The one tree is producing more fruit than the other. But it's because the one, let's say the one tree's soil is better than the other one, in a metaphor for better education, better background, in quotation marks, white privilege. So you get into your garden, there are two trees, then one is producing more fruit than the other. You have two options. One option is you go over to the tree that is producing more fruit, and you take some of its fruit and you just write it up in your log where you're logging your the amount of fruit that you harvested that day, and you just log it under the other tree's harvest or the other tree's yield, and you pretend like both trees produced the same yield. Or you go to actually there are three options. Or you go to the other tree that is producing less, and you take some fake fruit and you attach it to the tree, and then you pretend like the trees are producing the same amount of fruit. Or the third option, you actually go to the tree producing less fruit and you get to the root of the problem, no pun intended, where you actually find out, okay, this tree's soil quality is worse than the other ones. Let's actually address this problem and get them on the same level. And if that tree, which in the very slender case that tree does not produce, after getting the same amount of soil quality, same amount of water, same amount of everything, it's still underproducing, then in this very slender chance that it still underproduces, then there's something wrong with the tree. But my gut feeling tells me if you give both trees the exact same amount of soil quality, water treatment, and everything, then you're going to see a much closer in terms of a same yield, and then you don't have to put fake fruit on the other tree or pretend like both trees are the same.
I think everyone has an experience that they know someone, or it happened to their fathers or their mothers or even themselves, where they were displaced from their work in favor of letting someone who's less competent in, or someone who doesn't have the necessary qualifications in, just based purely on quotas or trying to fulfill a quota, even being passed up for promotion on the basis of your skin color. And not to deviate too much, but to give an idea, some of the labor laws that we have in this country, those that primarily influence this sort of situation would be the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment. And the other one would be the Equal Employment or the Employment Equity Act. And what's always interesting is to sort of see that, there is the idea of merit itself doesn't factor into these discussions, because you've got legislation breathing down your neck. You've got all sorts of other laws or social pressures that keep you from sometimes making the best choice. And I mean, and the public sector is lost where that's concerned.
I just want people to really understand that what these laws have caused is, and especially like your answer to the previous question, is that they've actually already put in place this idea of equal outcomes. We already live under, in the public center, under a state that is enforcing equal outcomes already, so that whatever demographic or whatever department you work in, the gender ratio and the racial ratios in the department has to be equivalent to the population demographic, which literally means that, you can only have 4% white people in the department. So, I mean, it's a nice thing, I think, for, overseas viewers and that to understand that we already live under that communistic state within the public sector, and you can just see what happens. There's obviously complete dysfunction, and that it's just a very good example to show people what's going to happen in your country if you work with equality of outcome and not equality of opportunity.
If one has to look at these situations, if one has to look at the issues that we face in terms of labor, in terms of culture and language, what practical solutions are there to the current issues then?
I would think that if you go to the question of how can Afrikaners adapt to this situation, I'd think that Well, that's actually my answer, is that we're going to have to adapt. If you are in a work environment where there are some odds stacked against you, you're going to have to look for different gaps in the demand. And I think because we are such a resourceful and really adaptive and innovative group of people, I think we are more than capable of dealing and finding a gap for ourselves and finding a place in the labor market and entrepreneurial opportunities where you just have to look for more. You need to think outside the box. You can't just go to university, study to be a chartered accountant, and then become a white picket fence type of person. You're going to have to think outside the box. You're going to have to become an entrepreneur. You're going to have to think, okay, here's what the demand in South Africa looks like in a broad sense, and what can I offer people, and what are people really looking for, and what can make me indispensable. How can I become indispensable to the economy of South Africa? What can I provide that nobody else can provide, where they can't replace me with anyone on superficial reason for this certain type of service that I'm going to provide? And I do think Afrikaners have that initiative and that innovation in them to be able to see these entrepreneurial gaps and to take the initiative to fill these gaps, and then to find a place for themselves even in this very rocky environment. It's like some type of plant that you try to introduce into an environment where it's not really suited for it, but at the same time it's a very adaptive or tough plant. It'll find a little crevice in the mountain. It will find a little. You can just look at how weeds find like little spots in your pavement or between little bricks. It's not a perfectly tilled field for them, but they find a little piece of dirt and they make that little piece of dirt their own, and they push up the bricks and make a space for themselves. And I do think the Afrikaner can do that as well, where we are in a sense like a type of weed, where you can't really wipe us out that easily. We'll find a way to keep existing even in a very hostile environment.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me is, and I think this is the problem with these laws, as they are implemented again, as you say, it kind of forces the Afrikaner to come in touch with his entrepreneurial spirit. And obviously we are not afraid of working hard. And I think then what happens is, you're actually going to see a lot more Afrikaners starting more businesses and actually becoming wealthier. And, what is that going to cause? That's going to cause more outrage, because if they've implemented this perfect equality of outcome rules, but it's still not working, and obviously no one believes genetics in this country. So what's going to happen then is then we're going to have to take it a few steps further. And that's exactly what we've seen with compensation or the land expropriation without compensation. Idea is that they realize that now to implement this problem of equality of outcome, that they just have to up the ante, which basically means violence. So, I mean, it is a very, very difficult time in that sense, in that we are forced to become entrepreneurs. We're forced to open our own businesses, and in the short term, that that might be a good thing, because you are going to become wealthier in a sense, or obviously not, but I think mostly we will. Then it'll actually just cause a bigger backlash, which in the near future might just lead to more violence.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with the fact that it's not a very stable route to go. We're definitely going to get some friction on that path. But at the same time, what else can we do? You're putting us in this situation where we have to think outside the box and have to think more innovatively, and then that we harvest the fruits of that, and that of course is monetary reward, and that's just gonna widen the gap. Because when you are really a top class entrepreneur and you don't just go for conventional ways of making money and you start thinking outside the box, that's where you start making serious cash. That's how you really start making it in life, is the fact where you actually start thinking outside the box. And ironically, all these obstacles being put in our way is actually pushing us in that direction where we become more successful.
No, it's definitely true that, and I think a good parallel is in overseas, especially in America, is the rise of something like identity politics, where, because it's sort of a liberal left paradigm, for the past 40 years, you see a rise in political correctness. And a rise in political correctness only increases the likelihood of you having dissident thoughts. And then obviously would be the reaction, a severe fallback. And I mean, that whole paradigm has largely been attributed, or one of the reasons as to why President Trump was voted in. And I think if you look at that and you look at it here in South Africa, that would be the outcome, is it would only make us stronger. So by all means, it sucks, and it's unfortunately there's blood and there's tears involved, but it makes us stronger.
Right, and every action has an equal and positive reaction, and my channel and your channel, I would say, is the reaction. This is what you're going to get, as you said, in a politically correct environment. You're going to get more channels like us, which are actually the counterculture. We are the edgy content. Nobody wants to listen to a channel that just regurgitates mainstream media and mainstream thought. They want edginess. And that's what the left always had to offer for people, was back when the conservatives and the right still controlled the paradigm. The left became the counterculture through music and art and protest. They became the creators of edgy content. But now that they're the establishment, they can't accept the fact that now the right has become the counterculture. And that's how the paradigm always works. Don't think that the right's going to stay the counterculture forever. We're probably going to win the culture war, touch wood. And then at the same time, when we win the culture war, we're going to become the establishment. And then the left's going to become the counterculture again. And then it's just the wheel that keeps turning, and the process that's been going on for human history since the dichotomy between, the very rough dichotomy between left and right came into existence.
Yeah, I see that's the cyclical nature is something that everyone seems to forget. History repeats itself. And in much the same way, if you lose your culture, if you lose your language, if you lose the ground from beneath your feet, and you're not able to speak about it anymore, the inevitable outcome would be violence. The inevitable outcome would be a severe reaction. And that's why free speech is so important. That's why it is important to talk about these things, because otherwise it would essentially be a keg waiting to blow.
Yeah, one of my favorite Afrikaans philosophers, MP van Wyk Louw, said, as important as blood circulation is to the body, as important is the circulation of ideas for a people. And at the same time, when you mentioned history repeats itself, I've modified that saying a bit. I always say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. To take the stance that history literally repeats itself, that means Nazi Germany comes into power again, or the Roman Empire reestablishes. But if you go on the fact that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, then you get movements that represent or are very similar to those events in the past, but they are still distinct and different. They are still situated in the present context. So that's just my personal twist on that saying, is the fact that history can't literally repeat itself, but the similarities are too big to ignore.
It's basically the same as basically Hollywood at the moment. It is, it's just a new remake every 10 years, just different actors and better CGI. Right. But still the same principles.
I don't know what the better CGI metaphorically represents in the real world, but yeah.
Jeez, well, hopefully something to do with the internet. But yeah.
Better propaganda, I guess, because CGI at the end of the day is still a ruse. It's not real.
Yeah, better lies.
And I'm not even joking. I do think propaganda has improved.
Better smoke screens. Definitely better smoke. No, it's one. Yeah. We've seen with our president who he tried to hide all his corruptness when he obviously took taxpayer money to build Nkandla, and he said he needed an extra pool because it's a fire pool or something, and there was actually a video showing that you can use a swimming pool as a fire pool, and with example, that's how well first I don't think we are, and that is how bad propaganda is. How bad it is.
Yeah, to quote him verbatim, show me what I have done wrong, and there you have it.
That's where I have to admit, that's where I agree with Zuma just on that thing, is for his people. And that being, you can argue, who are his people? I mean, he's got how many wives and how many kids? he's actually done nothing wrong by them. And yeah, it's selfish, but I agree with that. Is my personal opinion, is that we should be more pro our people. We shouldn't just to support our own people, to help them, to be there for our kin, our loved ones, our larger communities, to be able to help them and be there for them. There's nothing wrong with that. So where that's concerned, I agree with Zuma. But I mean, obviously, it was a huge spate of corruption, and the whole Nkandla setup was another domino that came up as a result of corruption tied to the ANC.
You could say a problem with the Afrikaner at the moment is there's this imbalance between sort of nepotism and altruism, and that balance, which is obviously swaying too much to, I would say, altruism, is being exploited. So, to reiterate your point, I think we need, I don't know how to create that, but how do you create more in-group preference amongst your people? And because that is the only way that we would stop subsidizing the larger majority in this country, and nepotistically take care of our own, which is just not happening.
Yeah, no, I don't have an answer to that. That's the Gordian knot that we've been left with, is the fact that that's the how do you get the Afrikaners to unite, a people that's never been able to stand united unless they were threatened by an external threat.
Yeah, and I have no idea how they do not see what's happening, how you not see it as an external threat. I think we all, in our own personal capacity, we're all trying to fight all these gun laws, and we're trying to arm ourselves in a way to protect ourselves. We all kind of taking care of ourselves, and obviously about your family and that, but it is as if we can't see past that, that wider circle. And again, it is literally the means by which the culture will be saved. I mean, it's very easy to talk about all these in a metaphorical way and a theoretical way, but in the end, and that's kind of obviously what our channel is about, is to explore these practical means. How do you literally go about practically implementing these ideas? But for me, which is obviously a more difficult question, is how do you change people's psyche in a way to see that they have to show more in-group preference in a way to benefit themselves. And I think that is a very good open question that I think we can all think about and see how you do that.
Well, the thing that you need to realize, and a lot of people listening also need to realize, is the fact that in a multicultural society, identity politics is inevitable. I think it was one of the former presidents of Indonesia, I think, or Singapore. One of these figures said that if you don't embrace identity politics in a multicultural society, then you're going to lose. Then you're going to be fighting each other on different rules. And that makes sense to me, the fact that when it's all about societal trust. And this gets back to human nature. The idea of, for thousands of years, we've been conditioned that if someone comes over the hills to your tribe and they don't look like you, they're probably here to either exterminate you or take everything you have. And that's where we got our in-group preference from. And that's what I told Styx about, is the fact that when I read The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, he mentions there that even albinos have an in-group preference where they are more likely to help another albino than someone that is not. And that's just something that we evolved with, the idea that if someone looks like you, they probably have very similar genes to you, therefore they share the same mission as you of continuing the existence of your genetic line. And at the same time, if they look like you, they're probably part of your tribe. If they completely differ from you in physical appearance, then they're probably some foreigner. And if you look at human history, if they're a foreigner, they're probably here to try and exploit you or see what weaknesses you have. So yes, that's in a multicultural society, identity politics is inevitable. You can't avoid that outcome where people start just voting with their group.
I'm in total agreement with the way we naturally operated throughout history. And postmodernism is very unnatural. especially this postmodernist society we stay in. As we wind down, I'd like to just touch on one of the other reasons why we have you on the show this evening, is to discuss the book by Ernst Roets, Kill the Boer. Now, you've got some interesting info that you'd like to share with us in that regard, and perhaps you can just tell us a bit more about the background to the book and just a bit more information in general.
Well, as it came to be, I was contacted by Willem Petzer, and he said Ernst Roets had invited him to the book launch, and Ernst had asked him personally to try and contact me as well, because he wanted me there as well as a social media influencer and someone that's obviously an Afrikaner. And I was more than happy to accept his invitation, because even if I wasn't invited, I was still planning on buying the book and helping promote it, because I think it's a very important publication. But now I've been invited to Ernst Roets' book launch. I'm going to fly up to Johannesburg, or well, rather Pretoria. The interesting thing is I'm looking forward to just talk to Ernst as my real name, not as Conscious Caracal, but rather as the person behind the character, and just to ask his views on the way forward and what he thinks I should do and what I should do in terms of one day disclosing my real identity and not operating under a pseudonym. And yeah, so at the moment I don't have a lot of insider information in terms of what is inside in the book. But I do know that he wants everyone attending the book launch is going to get a copy of the book, and he would like that everyone that gets a copy can promote it and use their platform and influence to get the word out. And I'm definitely going to do that. I'm going to read that book. I'm going to try and read it within a week, so I can, before it hits the mainstream completely, I can get a review up and help promote it and just give people some highlights and things that are interesting that have been mentioned in it. But I do think it's going to be a very controversial work. I think it's going to face the full vitriol from the media. I think it's going to be a very mixed reception in terms of how people review it and how people receive it. But I'm really looking forward to reading it. I was planning on reading it before I even knew that I was invited to the launch, which I find incredibly humbling. The fact that me, some random person that just started posting his views online, is now in a position where I'm being invited to the book launch of a person that I look up to. And yeah, I'm looking forward to just seeing that part of South Africa again. I don't have the privilege of visiting that often. I've been there a couple of times, but I really want to go back to the Voortrekker Monument. I was there, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And I want to go back just to get some inspiration again. And the first time I was there, it was close to a religious experience. So I definitely want to utilize my time as best as possible while I'm up there. And hopefully when I get back, I can give the audience and you a very detailed report in terms of what I learned and what I experienced and how I find the work itself. So no, I'm very keen and looking forward to it. And this coming week is going to be a big week in terms of just coordinating with Willem as well, because he wants to start working more closely with me in terms of getting publications out, maybe even to give you some insider information, maybe even start a media company next year. But yeah, no, we'll see where it goes. And I'm very optimistic in terms of what lies ahead on the horizon. I think I'm finally doing something where I feel like this is giving my life a lot of satisfaction, and I feel like I'm doing something to actually, even though it sounds very cliche, to change the world for the better.
We look forward to being able to discuss the experience with you at a later stage, and especially to have you back on the show again so that you can relate your experience. I can imagine how humbling it must be to, start from nothing. And this is maybe sort of a parallel to the way that Afrikaans was made in the country and came about, and the way that I think many aspects, and even the country itself was built, is that you start from nothing and work towards something and obtain that satisfaction from progression and seeing an influence from what you do. And we can't thank you enough for what you do and the word that you spread. If you could also please just give us any final thoughts on any other future projects you might have, and then also just to please tell the audience where they can see more of your work.
Interesting thing, when I was visiting Urania, I talked to a person there that had a business, and he told me to relate back to what you said. He told me that in Urania, you can see your efforts manifest in building something new. When you start a business in Cape Town or go work in a bank in Joburg, after you die, that bank's still going to be there and you didn't really change a thing. But if you go to a place like Urania and you start a business or you start an organization there, you can see the fruits of your ambitions. And I do think that's a very important point that you brought up. And in terms of final thoughts, again, as I always end my shows, in terms of don't just believe what anyone tells you, even though no matter how much you respect them, always take what they say critically and do the research yourself. Don't become lazy or complacent. And do not get caught up in an echo chamber, because that's going to dull your mind. You're not going to be able to debate at all. And at the same time as well, if you're only part of a circle jerk where everyone's patting each other on the back and saying how right you are and how great it is to know how the world works, then you're not going to be exposed to different opinions, and you're not going to have your own views challenged, which is like folding steel. If you have your views challenged in a debate and you can come out of that debate still believing everything you did and defending your views rationally and calmly, then I think you are better off after that debate than you were before it. So at the same time, that's what I want to encourage with people listening, is the fact that you need to be open-minded in terms of what other people are saying. Even though you completely disagree with them, maybe they can challenge your views to an extent where you actually learn something new or improve your stances. And also, at the same time, don't just leave it to Conscious Caracal and the Boer Republic podcast to put your views out there. We need you in the arena as well, also putting your views out there and injecting some rationality and just common sense back into the political spectrum. So start a Twitter account, start a YouTube channel, start becoming part of the conversation, and that's how you could change the world a little bit at a time. And where I want to leave off is I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me on your channel. This was an incredibly interesting conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. And you are more than welcome back on my channel as well. You can find me at Conscious Caracal or Stream of Consciousness on YouTube. Find me on Twitter as well. You can search my username at CONCARACAL, Caracal. And please come say hi on Twitter. Come have a conversation in my live chats or in the comment section. I always like seeing new people come voice their opinions, even if they completely disagree with me. That's always great. And you can also find me on Gab.Ai if you just sort of search Conscious Caracal.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you for the excellent conversation. We really enjoyed this discussion. I think we brought up a few points that are very important in not only understanding Afrikaans, but understanding ourselves as Afrikaners and the way forward.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to another Boer Republic podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And if this message resonates with you, please spread it as far as you can. Your support is appreciated. Any feedback is encouraged, and we look forward to engaging with you on our various social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter, Gab.Ai, Minds.com, Steemit, YouTube, DTube, BitChute, and PewTube, as well as on wrongthink.net. We update as regularly as we can, so please follow us and reach out to us. Until next time, stay safe wherever you may find yourself.